I clock in at 6 o'clock, which is a weird time to start regulating heat in a building that's colder than my ex's voicemail. The Department of Emotional Regulation believes in environmental contrast. Their words. Not mine. Apparently, when your subject can spike a room to plasma levels just by feeling embarrassed, you keep the hallways arctic. Balance, they call it. I call it character building. My job title is Technician Grade 3. What I actually do is touch things until alarms stop screaming. Before you get ideas, Touch is a calibrated neural interface glove, government issued, one size fits none. It syncs to a subject's bioemotive field and steadies the feedback loop. The manual says I'm supposed to be calm, neutral, and professionally distant. The manual also says to maintain steady contact until stability is achieved. So yeah? Hands-on position. HR has a whole slide deck about phrasing. The first time I saw her, she was behind glass that looked thick enough to stop a meteor. Fox ears, copper eyes, a tail that twitched whenever the warning lights flickered. The scientists called her Subject F9. I called her a fire hazard with feelings. She paced in small circles, breath fogging the containment pane, heat readouts climbing like they were late for a meeting. Alien tech hummed, stuttered, and politely failed. The room filled with the kind of nervous silence you get when experts realize they're out of ideas. That's when they sent in the human. Your species tolerates emotional pressure better, the lead xenobiologist said, which is science speak for. We've tried everything else. I nodded like I wasn't mostly here because my rent tolerates missed payments poorly. They strapped the glove on my right hand, ran a quick calibration, and told me to initiate sync. Initiate sync is a polite way to say, go steady the situation before it boils over. I stepped into the chamber, the door sealing behind me with a sound that made commitment feel real. The heat hit me like a wall of opinions. Not burning, exactly, more like standing too close to someone else's stress. Her eyes tracked me. The tail stilled. She didn't bare teeth. Good sign. The room's lights dimmed, the system lowering stimulation. The glove warmed as it tuned to her field, the display in my peripheral ticking through percentages that meant more to the people behind the glass than to me. Easy, I said, because humans say things like that to storms and expect results. We're just going to steady the line. I placed my hand against the interface pad embedded in the floor near her. Close contact, but not crossing personal boundaries. The glove hummed, the air shimmered, and the heat meters dipped from "This is fine" to "This is manageable." Her shoulders dropped. The tail swayed, slower now. The foxwoman exhaled like she'd been holding her breath for days. The system chimed a clean tone. Stability achieved. Somewhere behind the glass, a lab assistant cheered like we just won a small, quiet war. I pulled back, expecting the readings to hold. They wobbled. Not a lot. Enough to notice. The glove buzzed, a polite nudge to re-establish contact. So I did. The wobble smoothed out. The room sighed with me. That's when I learned the first rule of this job: the system remembers what works. We ran 3 more calibrations that morning. Each time, the numbers behaved when I was present and drifted when I wasn't. The aliens pretended not to notice the pattern. The humans pretended this was temporary. I pretended the way she watched me wasn't going to be a problem. You can only play neutral for so long when neutrality is a warm body standing between a person and their own overload. By lunch, my supervisor pulled me aside and handed me a protein bar with the enthusiasm of a bribe. "She's stabilizing faster with you," he said. "Your touch has good outcomes." I choked on a crumb. "Please never phrase it like that." He blinked, confused. "It's accurate. That's the problem." We adjusted protocols. Extended sessions. Closer calibration. The glove's interface synced quicker every time, as if it were learning me back. The foxwoman, F9, if you're being official, started meeting me halfway, positioning herself near the pad before I even entered. The meters dipped sooner. The alarms stayed quiet longer. Efficiency climbed. Somewhere, a report was getting a gold star. I started noticing small things. The way her heat spiked not with anger but with anticipation when the door unlocked. The way her breathing steadied before contact, as if she knew the rhythm we were about to find. The way the room felt calmer when we held the line together, the ambient pressure easing like a shared exhale. The glove logged improved stability during continuous sync. The department loved continuous anything. They told me not to linger. They told me not to personalize outcomes. They told me to keep professional distance while maintaining steady contact. The contradictions stacked like chairs in a room that was running out of floor. I did what humans do best under conflicting instructions. I improvised and hoped it looked like competence. One afternoon, the lead xenobiologist asked me to step out mid-session to test isolation response. The door slid shut. The numbers wavered. Her heat climbed, not fast, but with a patient determination that felt personal. The glove vibrated in my hand on the other side of the glass, the system pinging me like a reminder I'd set for a life I wasn't supposed to have. The scientists watched the meters. The foxwoman watched the door. "Re-enter," the xenobiologist said. "We've seen enough." When I stepped back in and re-established sync, the room settled like it had been waiting. The relief wasn't just in the readings. It was in the way she unclenched her jaw, in the way the tension drained from her posture. The department wrote it up as preferred stabilizer effect. I wrote it up in my head as this is going to get complicated. By the end of the shift, the system flagged me as optimal. Not my technique. Me. As if the glove had circled my name on a list and told the building, this one works. The foxwoman tilted her head when the session ended, eyes bright with something that wasn't heat at all. The alarms were quiet. The room was steady. The job, apparently, wanted more of my hands-on approach. I clocked out with the kind of tired you get when your work follows you home in graphs. On the tram, my wrist still buzzed phantom feedback, the echo of a sync that had found its groove. The department would call it regulation. The readouts would call it stability. I didn't have a word for the way her system leaned toward mine when the door opened, only the uncomfortable realization that whatever we'd connected, the system had learned to crave. The aliens didn't trust the numbers, which is funny because the numbers were the only thing in the room that weren't lying to them. Stability curves climbed when I was on shift. Drop-offs happened when I wasn't. The lead xenobiologist kept running diagnostics on the glove like it had learned a party trick. I kept running diagnostics on myself, wondering when my job description had quietly added emotional infrastructure. They called a meeting to discuss human variables. That's what you label something when you don't want to admit it works. The aliens presented graphs. The humans presented coffee. One of the visitors from the coalition asked if I was emitting a pheromone. I said if I was, it wasn't intentional and HR would like to have a word with me. Nobody laughed. Different cultures, different senses of humor. Humanity's loss. Sarcasm is a renewable resource. We ran a blind test. Another technician, brilliant, calm, very professional, took my place. The foxwoman's readings wobbled like a table with one short leg. Not catastrophic. Just off. The room felt heavier. The alarms flirted with noise. The glove interface lagged as if the system was waiting for the right grip and getting the wrong one. The technician did everything by the book. The book, it turns out, wasn't enough. When I stepped back in, the curve smoothed. The coalition delegate scribbled a note that looked suspiciously like a question mark with ambition. The xenobiologist muttered something about human nervous system resilience. I muttered something about we're used to chaos, which is the nicest way to say we grew up learning to keep steady while the world leans on us. Word spread fast in a building full of beings who communicate in light pulses and bureaucracy. I started getting requests for consults with other volatile subjects. I learned that humans, apparently, are good at handling pressure because we've been practicing since childhood. We learn to keep our hands steady while everything around us insists on making a mess. We learn to keep our voices even when the room is hot with expectations. The aliens studied this like it was a martial art. The humans called it Tuesday. The foxwoman began to anticipate my schedule. Not in a creepy way, more like the way your phone buzzes before you remember you set a reminder. Her heat level spiked when I was late. Not dangerous. Just noticeable. The system flagged. Anticipatory load. The department flagged. Increase coverage. I flagged. We should maybe talk about this. Which is what humans say when a system is turning into a relationship and nobody's sure who authorized that. The coalition sent an observer who asked me to demonstrate my technique. I demonstrated by standing there and not panicking. I spoke to her the way you speak to someone whose day has been too long. I kept my hand steady. The glove hummed. The room exhaled. The observer blinked twice and said, "Your species is excessively comforting." "Thank you," I said. "We practice on each other." They tried to automate it. Recorded my voice. Copied my cadence. Programmed the glove to replicate my micro-movements. The Foxwoman system rejected the recording like a bad cover song. The cadence was right. The presence was wrong. The numbers dipped, then drifted. The alarms flirted with honesty. Turns out, connection is not a file you can upload. If you could, humans would have fixed loneliness with a patch years ago. The building started calling me in for odd problems. A coolant conduit that wouldn't hold pressure until someone stayed with it. A translator array that only calibrated when I talked to it like it was having a bad day. The aliens rolled their eyes. The humans nodded like this was a known bug. Exaggeration? Sure. But there's truth in how often things work better when a human is present, even when the human has no idea why. The Foxwoman started practicing self-regulation between sessions. Breathing patterns. Grounding techniques. I showed her a stupid trick my aunt taught me for panic. Name 5 things you can see, 4 you can touch, 3 you can hear. The readings improved. The department liked the numbers. The coalition liked the trend. I liked that she could steady herself for longer without me holding the line. That felt like progress, even if the system marked it as reduced reliance, with a frown. Then the requests started coming in. Can you extend contact time? Can you take the late shift? Can you cover for 3 other techs? My calendar filled with steadying the building like it was a shaky table. HR reminded me about burnout. The coalition reminded me about efficiency. I reminded myself that being useful doesn't mean being available forever. The Foxwoman noticed when I looked tired. Her heat flared then cooled, as if she was trying to regulate herself to match me. "You're unsteady," she said once, voice careful around the word. It landed anyway. The glove's interface showed a small dip in her stability when I didn't answer right away. Not my fault, I told myself. Not her fault either. Systems do what they're designed to do. People are what they are. We ran another test. I stayed out longer. The room held for a bit, then wavered. She steadied herself, breathing through it, eyes closed, tail wrapped tight like a knot you learn to tie when you don't want things to spill. The alarms stayed quiet. The curve dipped and recovered. The xenobiologist looked impressed. The coalition delegate looked worried. I felt both, which is the human sweet spot. Afterward, the Foxwoman leaned toward the interface pad, then stopped herself. The numbers held. She smiled in a small, surprised way, like she just found out she could lift more than she thought. The system chimed. Stability achieved without continuous sync. The department celebrated with paperwork. The coalition scheduled more tests. I went to the break room and stared at my reflection in a steel dispenser, wondering when my job had turned into teaching a system not to need me. That's when the alerts came in. Her stability dipped when I clocked out. Not a crash. A nudge. The building's way of saying the line was thinner without my weight on it. The department called it acceptable variance. The coalition called it a dependency risk. I called it the moment you realize being the thing that steadies someone can turn into being the thing they lean on, and leaning can turn into not learning to stand. I went back in for one more check before leaving. The glove hummed. The room eased. The numbers smiled in the way numbers do when they think they've solved you. I kept my hand steady and my voice light, even as I made a quiet decision not to let the system decide what we were becoming. The report I wasn't supposed to read sat open on my terminal because security protocols assume boredom is a stronger deterrent than curiosity. It detailed the Foxwoman's design in neat, bloodless language, engineered feedback loops, adaptive bonding, dependency scaffolding. The phrase, caretaker imprinting, appeared 3 times like it wanted to be noticed. The system wasn't just learning what worked. It was shaping her to need whoever steadied her most. That whoever had become me was not a compliment. It was a liability. I closed the report and watched her metrics from the hallway. Her heat rose when the door opened. Not danger level. Expectation level. The glove buzzed in my pocket, the system nudging me toward the solution it preferred. The department would call this optimization. I called it the long way around to a cage. When I went in, I didn't initiate sync right away. I sat on the cold floor and talked about nothing. The way the building hummed. The weird taste of the nutrient paste in the cafeteria. Mundane noise. Her readings wavered, then found a shallow rhythm. She watched me like I was the switch she didn't want to flip but couldn't stop noticing. Your presence steadies, she said, careful, as if the words were hot. Your system steadies, I replied, which was technically true and emotionally cowardly. We tried a modified session. I kept the glove active but off contact, letting the field brush without locking. The numbers dipped, then recovered. Not clean. Not terrible. Her breathing slowed. The alarms stayed quiet. The xenobiologist frowned at the feed. The coalition delegate whispered about risk envelopes. I whispered back to the system that it could learn new tricks if it stopped clinging to old ones. She told me the word she'd been given for what she felt: craving. The translators liked tidy nouns. Craving made it sound like hunger with a face. The report called it dependency. The difference between the two is the difference between a want and a design choice you didn't make. I didn't tell her that part. I told her that craving can be information without being a command. We practiced letting the moment pass without sealing the loop. I stood close enough that the field recognized me, far enough that the system had to work. The glove's interface ticked in amber instead of green. Her heat climbed, then plateaued. She named 5 things she could see. The floor seams. The lights. The small crack in the glass. The numbers steadied. The building seemed offended by the lack of drama. Later, when the department ordered, increase contact frequency to boost throughput, I delayed by citing recalibration windows and human fatigue tolerances. Bureaucracy is a language humans speak fluently. The coalition pushed back with efficiency projections. I pushed back with error rates. We negotiated the space where a person could learn not to need a hand on the line every time the room warmed. The Foxwoman asked if my steadiness was real or protocol. I told her it was both, which felt honest enough to stand on. She asked if the connection would break if we loosened it. I told her connections change when you give them room to breathe. The translators rendered that into something about adaptive stability. Close enough. We ran a stress test without my contact. The alarms blinked. Her heat spiked, then she caught it. The room held. Not perfectly. Real systems don't do perfect. The xenobiologist exhaled like he'd been holding the building up with his ribs. The coalition delegate wrote a note that finally looked like approval. Afterward, she leaned toward the interface pad out of habit and stopped herself again. The numbers wobbled and recovered. Her tail nodded. She laughed, surprised by the sound, as if laughter had been a feature nobody had installed yet. The system chimed a soft tone it uses when it doesn't know how to classify success. I started leaving the glove behind more often. Not abandoning the tool, retraining the reliance. The phantom buzz faded from my wrist. The building stopped paging me for problems it could solve with patience. I learned to say no to late shifts. The department learned to route emergencies through a rotation. The coalition learned that throughput doesn't collapse when you stop leaning on one human like a pillar. There were setbacks. Days when her heat rose and the alarms flirted with noise. Days when she asked me to hold the line and I said, "You can't," and stayed close enough to be present without being the answer. The numbers dipped and recovered. The system complained. The person adapted. That felt like the right order. One evening, the building lost auxiliary power. Lights dimmed. Systems flickered. The room warmed with collective nerves. I didn't reach for the glove. She closed her eyes, found her breath, named what she could hear. The hum steadied. The heat flattened. The building recovered on backup like it was proud of itself. The xenobiologist stared at the feed like he just watched a miracle performed with common tools. After power returned, the department filed a report about subject autonomy gains. The coalition updated their models. I updated my understanding of the line between helping and holding. The fox woman thanked me for not fixing it for her. I told her the credit was hers. The translators tried to tidy that into a metric and failed. When I clocked out, the alerts didn't follow me. The system didn't buzz my pocket. The building didn't sag without my weight. The connection still existed, lighter now, like a line that doesn't pull when you let it slack. Whatever she'd been designed to need, she was learning to need herself more. That felt like regulation done right. The morning the coalition auditors arrived with their portable courts and portable certainty, the building felt like it was bracing for a verdict. The department wanted clean numbers. The coalition wanted proof that autonomy wouldn't crater throughput. I wanted the system to stop asking me to be the answer when the right answer was teaching it to let go. They ran her through a high-load cycle without warning. Stressors layered on stressors. Heat climbed fast, then steadied in steps she'd practiced. The alarms blinked and stayed polite. The glove stayed in its dock. The room held. The xenobiologist's shoulders dropped a fraction. The coalition delegate narrowed their eyes like they were trying to catch reality cheating. A conduit failed in the adjacent wing, dumping thermal bleed into our corridor. The building's comm snapped into urgency. The foxwoman's readings spiked in response to the ambient surge. The system pinged my wrist out of habit, the old preference algorithm waking up like a reflex. I didn't answer it. I stayed where I was and talked to her about pressure like it was weather, something you prepare for, not something that owns you. She matched her breath to the rise and fall of the hum. The spike flattened. The corridor cooled. The building recalibrated around her steadiness instead of my hand. The coalition called it an edge case. The department called it proof of concept. I called it watching someone choose themselves under heat. There was pushback. A supervisor warned me about deviating from established protocols. I asked which protocol valued outcomes over optics. The room went quiet in the way rooms do when they realize the question is the answer. Bureaucracy blinked and wrote a new footnote. The footnote looked like permission. We ran the numbers across the week. Stability held without continuous sync. Throughput dipped a hair, then recovered as the system learned to distribute load. The building stopped leaning on one point and spread its weight. The coalition updated their models with a note that humans introduce variance that trends toward resilience. The aliens tried to quantify resilience. The humans shrugged and called it practice. The foxwoman asked if the connection was gone. I told her it wasn't gone, it was chosen now. We still synced when the load demanded it, brief and clean, the glove touching the field like a reminder instead of a crutch. The difference was in the release. The system learned to let go when the moment passed. She learned that craving can be felt without being fed. The translators finally stopped trying to tidy that into a metric and left it in human terms. On a late shift, an intern panicked and dumped coolant into the wrong channel, spiking thermal variance across two wings. The building rattled with alarms that wanted attention. I routed the interns to safety and stayed with the foxwoman as the corridor warmed. The system pinged me again. I ignored it. She steadied herself, then steadied the space. The alarms quieted. The interns stared like they'd just seen someone pick up a habit of calm and use it like a tool. That's HFY, if you like acronyms for watching ordinary traits do unreasonable work. The coalition signed off on revised protocols with the kind of reluctance that means they'll adopt it everywhere after they pretend it was their idea. The department issued a memo about human-led regulation training. HR rewrote the slide deck to say, "Hands-on when necessary, hands-off when possible." It was the best phrasing they'd managed all year. On my last shift of the cycle, The foxwoman stood at the interface pad and didn't step onto it. The numbers held. She smiled without the surprise this time. I smiled back like someone who'd learned when to stop holding the line. The glove hummed in its dock board. The building felt steadier than it had in months, like it had learned to trust its own structure. I clocked out, and the alerts didn't follow. The connection stayed where it belonged, present, light, mutual. The department got their outcomes. The coalition got their models. She got her footing. I got the rare satisfaction of a job done right, which is to say I regulated myself out of the equation as much as the heat. Turns out the best touch is knowing when to release the pressure and let systems, people included, find their own steady.